Hi, I'm Joel, a white kid that grew up in Indonesia. I'm interested in the unvarnished look, an examination of the driving force for art. In this series, I'm going to explore the relationship between places, the place you leave to the place you go, and the place that develops in between. That third space can be a strange and wonderful fusion, a hybrid for creative magic. These conversations will hopefully develop a composite picture of a third culture artist who has straddled multiple worlds and how that influences their expression through art.
Does it sound okay? Do I sound okay? Oh, it is? Okay, if you can turn. Okay, cool. Liam, welcome to Third Heat, the show.
Thank you. Who is Liam? That's my brother.
What's your idea?
That's my alter ego.
Yeah.
Punk Duck Warlord, that's me now.
Vancouver resident Liam, the self-proclaimed punk duck warlord, is a bit of a contradiction. He's punk rock but aspirational. He's a Scottish warrior but paints ducks instead of his face. Braveheart reference. In a world that craves order, Liam colludes with chaos. He's a director, painter, and storyteller, but most of all, he's a third culture artist.
Right, so I'm from the East End of Glasgow, Scotland. Yeah, East End of Glasgow was a pretty rough place in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. That's where I lived, and you know, it was black tenements and stuff. And you know, my mum and dad were from a generation that, you know, they lived in poverty. They went through a war and stuff like that, and lost parents and, you know, and things like that. So they, you know, there were a lot of disadvantages that. And then they got the opportunity to emigrate to Canada, and we.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 7 the first time I moved here, and then later in life the second time.
Okay.
First time we came to Vancouver Island.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was, I think it was just too much of a culture shock for my mum and dad. And then the second time we went to Scarborough, Ontario. And that's where...
More your speed?
Honestly, it was brilliant. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And people give Scarborough a bad rep in that, but when you were a young kid, it was just full of immigrants. Mm-hmm. Like Canadians were a rarity, but even the Canadians is some sort of like, they were like first or second generation Greek or Italian or Scottish or English. And, you know, everybody gelled and connected through playing soccer. And so your school team, you know, was packed full of like different ethnic cultures. And you could see it change all the time. Like our area was very much Jamaican, Trinidadian, and then it went to more African, as long as the rest of the people all stayed there. And what we did every night is we just, we owned the soccer pitch at the school, and that's where everybody came together, and it was like, you know, it influenced everyone because you were really immersed in each other's cultures. Like my currency when I came over was punk rock.
Yeah.
So I was coming over with something new, and like these new, I knew about this new music and all that, and I'd been able to dive deeply into it by 1977, and I was, you know, into punk rock. And then because I had an accent as well, and because I was from over there, I was seen as being more credible.
The first time a music wave starts, it usually attracts like fringe people. Did you feel like you were a fringe person?
I always felt comfortable being on the fringe. Yeah. And so that was a way for me to access the fringe in a bold way that was sort of like, you know, it was a bit of a commitment. And the thing that was really interesting with punk, I think it was the first time ever where a trend came out that was really marketed toward teenagers and rebellion. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of things like so I was 17 when it came out. If you were in your 20s, like guys in their 20s were serious adults, and they wouldn't, you know, it was like, even guys in bands, there's guys like Bill Drummond talks about it from the KLF, that he ended up managing punk bands because at 21 or 22, he was considered too old to be in a punk band. Really.
Liam has the punk style and fashion, but I want to know how this influenced his early years as a creative.
I found out I had a market drawing like really stereotypical Scottish stuff, which was fun. And now when I go back and I do that now, it's with like a sense of irony and almost like mischief now, where like now it's just, you know, having a laugh with it, right? And you know, exploiting the culture for what it was and what you interpreted it was back then, because you know, it's really easy to fall into the tropes and stuff, right, of your heritage and your culture. Yeah. I found a lot of people that immigrated from Scotland, England, Ireland, they became more English or more Irish or more Scottish the longer the time you come here, because I think you start immersing yourself into that identity. So if you're known, you know, in Glasgow, nobody gives a care if you're the Scottish guy, right? There's nothing, you're just like every other idiot out there, right?
Yeah.
But in Canada, when you're a Scottish guy, well, that becomes an identity. And so you start playing to that identity. My first gig, like creative gig, right, where I got like real money paid to me to be a creative person, was working in a sign company.
Right.
And I ended up working in a few different sign companies. Like I sort of did my way up where I became like rock star in the sign company guys, which is like the most bizarrest thing ever.
Yeah.
But in the early 80s, I had it in my head that like there was this whole thing, like those sign design competitions that were international and stuff like that. And I said, all right, I'm gonna win that. I'm gonna, like there was a top 20, right? The year I won it, it was in Toronto. So it was like, oh, you know. But anyway, for me, that was it. And I decided, right, I'm gonna figure a way how to smash this and be a rock star doing this stuff. And I more or less did it. And I did it just by being unconventional. But, you know, part of the brassiness, because I was, you know, Scottish and an immigrant and that, I wasn't afraid to stand out. I already stood out. First time I opened my mouth in class, and my accent, and I think it was in math, was the first class in the high school. I remember coming in and the answer was, I was dreading it, like it was coming, I know the answer is going to be 30. And I said, sorry, 30? No, 30? No, 40? No. You know, it's just like, and it was just one of these, I just knew I was going to go through it. I just got absolutely ridiculed. But now you go through all that, you don't care anymore. Now I do it on purpose just to mess with people.
Punk rock and aspiration may seem like contrasting ideals, but for the Punk Duck Warlord, they are one and the same. He certainly has the DIY ethos and the rejection of the status quo.
So I know you have like a long history in the world of advertising. How did you get into advertising? And how does your background help propel you through like the different agencies that you worked at, and how you got work through that?
Yeah, I got into advertising through the back door. My first job officially in advertising was creative director. And I really wasn't sure
Your first job?
My very first job in advertising was as a creative
Just started
director.
right at the top.
Yeah.
Again, that's great.
My first ever job on set was as a director.
Yeah.
Is he a magician or something?
I couldn't get a job. I didn't know how to start. I didn't know anybody. I didn't come from a culture where I had friends or family or anything. We had no relatives here, and I didn't have any friends in Scarborough that's fathers worked in advertising or knew anybody, or that Mad Men wasn't a thing. So I just I met this Polish guy once, and he told me, well, you should work in advertising. And I got it in my head and applied for this job in advertising, and the guy made me creative director, and then I got a chance, and I stayed there for 3 months. Wow. 3 months. And then I started my own agency. After 3 months, I figured, okay, I've got this figured out. And then me and this Polish guy who I used to work with at a previous place, this guy Tad, he was an absolute genius. He was the complete opposite me, but he was also an immigrant from Poland. And he spoke very little English. In fact, we spent so much time together that English that he learned was rubbish, because he was speaking it like me, and so it didn't really work for him. And that was always like, hey, teach me the wrong English. But so we started an agency together, and that was basically a response. It was like, it's hard getting hired by an agency. Like it's like getting into the mafia, some of the times. And I've seen it. I've been a gatekeeper at times, and when it's like to get people, and all that was just about timing and luck, and all sorts of factors of how you grow a good creative department and stuff. But Tad and I was like, we wanted to start. It was easy for us to convince clients we were good, than convincing a whole agency.
Yeah.
And so we went after our own clients, just started our agency, and I get really, I go back, I still can't believe how quick it happened and how easy it was.
Yeah. Most art disciplines are a method of communication. And which one is your language? Which one would you say is the one you would speak through the most?
Conceptual.
Yeah.
Yeah, conceptual, and that is like, you know, I do everything in a notebook. So my notebooks become grimoires, right? And grimoires, Alan Moore talks about magic, the comic book writer. He says art and magic are pretty well indistinguishable from each other. It's the exact same thing. And so for me, my form of creativity is I really think I'm flourishing. I really think I'm creating when I've got a notebook in front of me, and it's everything. It's everything's coming up in my mind, and I'm going through. I'm channeling that creative spirit that's now coming through into a notebook. And the whole thing about spelling, spell casting. You know, a grimoire comes from the word grammar, and grammar is to spell and all that. And what you're doing is once you take it from here and you put that on page, you are channeling creativity, you're channeling magic, you know? And to me, that's, everything starts from there, and then however I apply it after that, but that's the route.
What's your favorite environment to be in when you're conceptualizing, and do you like disappearing into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I like a bit of ritual and a bit of ceremony around the creative. I mean, for me, that can make it magical. There's certain times where I feel I need to get into a zone, into something creatively. And I think this goes back to how people used to perform ceremonies and rituals, you know, everything from drawing buffaloes on a cave wall to, you know, how you're going to tackle this in woolly mammoth or whatever. Yeah, your food of choices. And I think it's the same thing as well too. It's like you got to, you know, just imagine, you know, what it is that you want to create, and then work towards that. You know, you start looking at efficiencies and ways of doing something, right? William Burroughs, you know, the writer, had this thing called do easy.
Yeah.
And what that was do easy is he would, it was just a way of thinking. It was like creating all your movements, all your thoughts, everything, so that everything you do has purpose and value and is at the prime sort of directive and sort of like where you should be to like create the most, what's the perfect movement. So it's almost like Zen in a way. He's like, if you're creating a cup of tea, how do you make it so it's a perfect thing, so that everything you do, your movements, everything is flawless. And so he had a thing called over easy, and that where if he walked into a room and he spilled a cup of tea, he would stop and he would literally go back, trace a step backwards to the door, and come back in properly. And now that he was like super conscious of what was going on, and then put it down, and that was called do easy. And I think there's a way to do that to influence your creativity.
Do easy? I'm always doing it the hard way.
You know, like when I was conceptualizing and stuff, and I couldn't think of an idea for something, and I knew I had a deadline for the next morning, I would put all my creativity into creating my presentation board. You know, back in the day, we used to have to cut the boards, tissue,
glue,
fold it. And like, okay, and so usually what happens is you end up doing that at the end. So I would start with, okay, well, I know I'm going to present it this size, so, you know, rather than just sitting thinking, oh, I don't have an idea, I'll start doing the boards. But I'm going to start putting all my creativity. I'm going to find the perfect way to cut that. I'm going to look at it and think, okay, what's the way that I cut that? It's going to give me the nicest, cleanest cut, so there's no raggities. Right. I'm not going to tear a finger off, you know, and doing it that. And then you go into your subconscious, and while you're doing that, that's where the creative answer starts coming, because you're now you're opening up creativity, but you're just doing it in something that's manually. Yeah. And so you know, I think that's like Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance and philosophies like that. It's not, you know, it's not something I own, right? But But I think that's a nice way, and I think ceremony's a big thing around that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of embrace the chaos. I think you have to, sometimes you have to go where it's a bit dark. And I talk about creative energy, you know, it's like, there's times where, you got to go down a couple of dark alleys and find some red lights and, you know, and experiment and explore. I mean, you know, that's with music, you know, it's like, you know, nothing good was ever in a sports stadium, you know, when you were young. You had to go and, you know, it's so much better when you found a band and you had to go and, you know, climb over a fence or something to get in the back door, or, you know, and then these guys are like, rock your socks off, or a cool rave, or things like that.
Do you feel like there's a direct connection between courage and integrity?
I don't know. I don't know if you can do that when, it's an economic situation. I think that, I mean, I'm not sounding very punk rock, but you have to be realistic. There always is a compromise anytime you do anything for money.
Right.
And so I think what you have to do is just find a way that what works for you. And like I said, working in a sign company wasn't the sexiest job in the world, but I wouldn't call it a grunt job because when I was there,
But you did good
I
work.
absolutely loved it.
But you did good work.
Yeah,
Still good
but
work.
I never felt like I'd sold out. At that point, I thought I'd become an artist, and I was really doing what I enjoyed doing. I was drawing, Futura font letters 3 feet high and neon things, but for me it was like Zen. I was doing creative. All my other friends were like welders and bricklayers and stuff like that, and I was an artist.
His art is bold and unapologetic. How does punk rock influence the punk duck painter?
Right. So, as I said, when I came to Canada, punk was kicking off.
Yeah.
And, there was two. I used to have a poster of Farrah Fawcett on the wall. And then when Blondie came out, sorry, Farrah got chucked in the bin. That was too hippie. I think I gave it to my brother.
Yeah.
And then Blondie went up on the wall, and Debbie Harry was just the queen of punk.
Yeah.
And everything about her was just super cool, and it was American, it was dangerous and all that. And so I love punk rock and all that. And so now I just completed a print collection that I just premiered the other night. And it's just all based on sort of like my early exposure to punk rock. And then through sort of like later in life, I used to design a lot of film posters. And then during the Toronto Film Festival, like the space is coveted, right? And back in the 90s and the 2000s, the best way to get your film advertised during the film festival when you got all this traffic in one area was to get your one sheets, those beautiful big movie posters. And it's like, I got to design those, and what a beautiful piece of canvas that is, right? I mean, when do you get to design posters that big? And so when you did the film festival, sometimes we'd have maybe 6 or 7 different posters in the festival, and then the other thing, and so they'd go up wild posting on the hoardings and that, and then over the week, new posters would go on top, and then by the weekend, you're now seeing all these layers forms of the week's entertainment and all that, all coming together to tell a story, and it's immersive, it's organic, it's dangerous, it's rugged, it's punk rock. And so I've started putting that into a collection of prints and originals that I've been doing lately, where I start with images and then I build up stories of layers of how they all look on top of each other, and add paint and graffiti and all that to it, and just sort of try and put together a visual narrative that's hidden and exposed at the same time, and layering and all that. And when I do the originals, like I love when the pieces actually rip and all that and torn, and it's like chaos, right?
Yeah.
Whereas it's all about how much can you contain and how much you're willing to get as close as you can to almost wrecking it, but keeping it amazing looking, So yeah, that's my latest style and stuff I've been working on.
So what would be your third heat? What's your third energy?
I'm in my third heat.
Yeah?
I mean, yeah, this is like it's my third act, So I've turned that age right now where, okay, third heat for me, I've worked for a lot of big companies, made a lot of people a lot of money. Now what I'm looking to do is change it up again.
Yeah.
So my wife's in Bulgaria right now, and we have a place there. And so I've been going and spending a lot of time in Bulgaria for the last 15 years. And, I've absolutely grown to love it there, love the people, love the food, and love all my family there. And so for me, I'm looking to see, okay, can I take what I do now and put that into a more remote type of thing, right? So working with creative people remotely.
Yep.
What I'd love to do is I'd love to train people in creativity, right?
Yeah.
And everybody out there has creative energy and has a creative brain, And sometimes, when you're a good creative director, is to find that in people, but find ways that you can bring that out of them. So, it's just like having a personal trainer, a fitness trainer, right? You can have a creativity trainer.
Yeah.
Because you find out when you go through experience and work with as many amazing people that I've had the chance to work with, you pick up things from them and you see that there are different ways to look at things, different ways to attack things and tackle them, and different skill sets in that, but it's all teachable.
Yeah.
And so there's no excuse, there's not reason for anybody not to be creative. And I think the more that we explore AI, the more we explore computers and simulations, you're going to find that there's still going to have to be a tactile thing where imagination and how you create and how the novelty or whatever it is that becomes part of your creative arsenal, whatever leads on that, that you're executing it to its full extent. Because I think if you're not investing in creativity, you're gonna lose out.
Talk to me about ducks.
Right. Donald, Huey, Daffy, Louie, Scrooge. Salty? Was he a duck? No, he was a seagull.
I've seen your ducks around town.
Yeah, there's a big flock of ducks around the world right now. And yeah, there's nothing that says love like a yellow rubber duck. There's nothing more punk rock than painting a yellow rubber duck.
There you go.
And so, yeah, I've taken 3-inch rubber duckies. I've got a certain brand that I like. I find it at a lovely wee shop in the West End of Vancouver.
Yeah.
The woman orders them especially for me.
Yeah.
And I've painted about over maybe 250.
Yeah.
And they're all around the world. And what I do is I decorate each wee rubber duck with about 5 different Discordian saints, which I choose at random or are offered to me as a insight into their personality. And then I create these Discordian prayer ducks. It's covered in black and white acrylic paint, and basically everything from punk rock priestesses to Joe Strummer to wizards, and I've even drawn people's pets on them.
Nice.
Which I quite enjoy, drawing dogs and cats. And so I make them and I give them as offerings. There are offerings that I make to the creative gods, and so I have 23 creative saints that I pray to every day.
List them,
right. Okay, Salvador Dali, Pablo Picasso, Amadeo Modigliani, Robert Anton Wilson, Bill Drummond, Jimmy Cuddy, Sticky Peaches, Connor Harrington, Hush, John Byrne, Bob Marley, Billy Connolly, Bruce Lee, Stan Lee, Grant Morrison, Frankie Boyle, Danny Boyle, Bill Hicks, Joe Strummer, David Bowie, Alan Moore, Vivienne Westwood.
All right, nice.
That's a lot of saints. So he's got the style, fashion, DIY ethos, and true expression of a punk duck warlord. But what does he treasure most?
Brand new notebook, brand new black marker pen, coffee, sitting in the window, cool people walking by, get in it, start drawing, doing something cool.
What's your greatest fear?
Losing that notebook, leaving it in a coffee shop and not being able to get it, or one of your enemies finding it, or a bad witch or something.
What does success as an artist look like to you?
I don't think it's money, right? I think it's being known, and I think it's being able to get to a point where you can do anything and a large group of people know right away that that's you. And I think that's what I've been trying to do, where it's like, do so many different things, but I'm trying to build a style into all of it now, where it all becomes immersive and it all becomes on brand, right? So, my third act right now is me finally polishing the brand. So I think I've done a really good job of brand building. I've put together a really cool history and story behind the brand. Now that third act for the brand, I think it's just to get it wider to a different type of people and see if I can expand it to doing more meaningful, more purposeful work.
Cool.
Brand me.
Does masterpiece exist, or is that a myth?
I think all your works are masterpieces. So yeah, I think it does exist. And I think when at one point in that time, it's a masterpiece and you love nothing more and you're proud of it and stuff like that. But with everything I think makes a good artist, I think it's being able to move on. So kill your darlings, let your palaces fall, just let it crumble now and again, because that, as long as that creative spark is still alive, it's the spark you got to keep. Everything else can go up in flames.
How has being in Vancouver impacted your work, like as a creative?
It's a lot wetter. Watercolors.
Yeah.
You know what? It let me shoot year round. I've never shot year round outside before, and so I learned how to shoot in the winter, and I forgot, trees don't have leaves in the winter, and so so you're shooting something, you're trying to make it look non-seasonal, and so you learn the difference between deciduous and coniferous trees, and what part of Vancouver they grow on, and where you can go to shoot that so it will look like the same as what it looks like in summer. Those are like some of the tricks. You also learn when shooting outside, when the seaplanes go above you, that's going to be a sound issue, and sirens and shit like that. So those are just the things. But Vancouver's it's funny. It's a very, very creative city, and there's a lot of talent here, and a lot of it in the digital space, and things and a lot of good schools here now as well. So, you're only sitting, either two ways. Like you're 3 feet away from a rat or another creative person when you live down here in Gastown.
Is there anything missing
From Vancouver?
Yeah, or something that you're kind of craving? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's something I find having like two cultural backgrounds. There's things I just desperately want from where I used to be that I want here.
Oh, I miss a really good Scottish breakfast.
Yeah.
Like with black pudding and haggis and just like potato scones and stuff.
Yeah.
Freezing cold iron brew right beside it, which is outlawed in Canada for some reason because it's got something in it that you're not allowed here. But we drink it like it's holy water, Like Scotland's one of the only places where Coke or Pepsi isn't the main drink. It's a thing called iron brew, and it's amazing.
Oh yeah, you told me about iron brew.
Yeah, it's like angels crying on your tongue. Is that good?
Do you choose courage?
Yeah, every time.
Yeah.
I think you got to be brave to be creative.
Yeah.
And being brave is never giving in to no, or I can't do that. That's where, to me, the bravery is. Like, I think, certainty, that is like the death of reason and passion and all that collectively, right? That person that's certain something's not going to work, and when you question that and you scrutinize, well, we've got this great idea, but we've put the brakes on because, someone said they don't know and that. And so I think getting past that sort of stuff as a creative that's where bravery, and that's where you have to be fearless of saying, no, we will make this work, and then being accountable and responsible to do it. And there's not one moment that stands out better than the next. As I said, when I primed myself that I wanted to have a creative life, that I wanted to do it, that I would look at, no matter where I was, that whatever I was doing at that time was exactly what I should be doing, and just embrace the moment. I mean, I've really, really managed to enjoy it by being aware that I'm in it.
He paints ducks, but he's no quack. Liam is the embodiment of the punk rock spirit. He's not afraid to be himself and inspire others to be creative and to be different. He's not afraid to be punk rock and aspirational at the same time. He brings the heat, moving comfortably in his third culture space. In short, Liam is the perfect blend of punk duck attitude and true self-expression, refusing to be defined by others and instead blaze his own trail with his bold and unapologetic punk duck swagger.
We can add more biking later, right?
Right, totally. We might as well just have it there the entire time.